Welcome to another episode of Inspire People, Impact Lives. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and I am happy to be back on the microphone or behind the mic. It's been a while since we did an interview due to coronavirus, COVID-19. Bunch of various reasons. We had cancellations and other stuff, and because people were scared to be in front of each other. But I'm happy today that I got Kyle Arneson with us. Kyle's here to chat on a number of different topics because he's a serial entrepreneur himself. But favorite book, or one of his favorite books, is Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And I'll tell a brief story before I let Kyle introduce himself to all of you. I'm a college dropout. I think I've mentioned that on our show before. Can't remember since it's been a while. But this was the first book that my dad handed me after dropping out of college. And so this is, as you can see, my copy. And I'll show the audience as we get this on YouTube. But old copy. Kyle told me this was the copy they used to give a cassette tape with. So my dad must have lost the cassette tape.
Yeah, Google it.
Because I only got the book. I didn't get to listen. And then we got some millennial listeners that are going, what's a cassette tape?
Right, that's what we got Google.
But they got Google for that. So, Kyle, really excited to get into conversation. Before we dive in, introduce yourself so I don't do a disservice just reading a bio.
Yeah, no, thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. And Chad, thanks for all your hard work to set this up. No problem. Again, Kyle Arneson, got a lot going on, but my main avenue, World Leadership Partners. But yeah, kind of fast forward to what's happening today. My family's been around Madison area here in Wisconsin since about 1840, as I mentioned, and they got here from Ireland and Norway and started planting seeds in the ground, and thus became commodity traders by proxy. And so they were always in business. Nobody in my family's ever had a job, a job. Fast forward, I was in the Marine Corps for 8 years, flying around Asia primarily, and most of my family goes all the way back to the American Civil War after Gettysburg for military service. And very fortunate, we all came back as opposed to some of our Gold Star families, and so I still do a lot with veterans and veteran philanthropy, including starting a second foundation currently. But I recently moved back to Madison about 18 months ago for family reasons and having the time of my life, doing a lot of business coaching. I'm a thinking partner for a lot of folks. But it's always been my belief that, similar to you, my dad had a number of different businesses, starting in agribusiness and, run the gamut. And I guess today, we would call that the serial entrepreneur. To me, that just means you keep failing forward. And so when you start taking a look at that type of thing, with all that's going on these days with, whether it's technology or these other entrepreneurs, and here we are in the midst of a readjustment. We can get into that too, because I think this is the absolute greatest time to grow, scale, or start anything, given the readjustment. But when I came back, and been around Madison here again my whole life, but got a lot of different projects going. And similar to you, as I mentioned, my dad basically had a Dale Carnegie and a Think and Grow Rich. And when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, looking on his home office, which most people in the neighborhood either worked for an insurance company or the state government or the university in our neighborhood down by the stadium. It was one of the first guys to have a home office. But what are you reading? I'm going to go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting or this kind of thing. And so he said, you want to read those? They're always sitting on my desk. And sure enough, I took to it, and I think I said I got the first one. I actually bought something off a newspaper ad, and there was cassette tapes, right? Google cassette tapes. But so that, I just turned 60. Well, I'll be 61 in a few months. And so that kind of came into my life and my awareness with Think and Grow Rich. And if you want to take the word rich out, meaning money or relationships or just wellness, probably more than 50 years ago. Nice. So, and I think it, as you can see my copy there, it rarely gets read, but that's only 4 years old. But I think the principles of that, right? Everything in this particular content, to me, if you get away from the 1936 copyright, if you were to look at the table of contents and you just start looking at that, to me, that's a way forward as principles of success for anyone that wants to move things forward, whatever they're working on or towards, whether they're an entrepreneur, whether they're in corporate, whether they're a foundational person, whatever they're working on or towards, they can get those principles of success. Nothing there went away. So
that's awesome. So why do you say if you get away from the 1936 copyright?
Because people think that when they start opening that up, wow, they talked funny back in the day. Well, you know what? Probably 100 years from now, they'll think we talk funny.
Yeah.
Or any of this stuff, right? The whole idea behind social distancing. What the heck was going on there? Or any of the other terms. So some of the vernacular, right? And the fact that it is mostly male dominated. But again, if you really just want to wipe the slate and look at 13 principles of success, even when that was in the early 30s and coming out of a Great Depression, Right? Isn't that interesting? There may be some real parallels to what stories are in there, the vignettes that are in there, and where we are today. And I think if you really want to do some analogy, it really says that, yes, get away with the vernacular, get away from folks that most of these are men. The realization is that things like persistence and desire and faith and organized planning and masterminding amongst other folks, that never went out of business, nor will it ever. So it, to me, seems to be a great entrepreneurial handbook.
Well, I love that you touched on that. And the reason I asked is because I thought that that's where you're going to go with the male-dominated verbiage, because so there are some things that are written back, in 1936 or whenever it might be. There was a great speech given at MDRT many years ago that I always give it. It's called the common denominator of success, and I give it to all of our new advisors coming in. And any of the women advisors, I say, please remove or insert woman where it says man, so that you can actually get the context of this, because there's such great principles in there, but it was written in a time that was directed at men, not all.
100%.
Right. So
100%. And I come from a very long lineage of independent business women, and again, I can only imagine, their journey and their story to keep breaking these barriers and these glass ceilings, and a lot of it will start with principles of success.
That's great. So you were about, preteen? Is that where you were when you got this book?
No, I probably 7th, 8th grade, maybe getting into high school.
So teenager, young
but just
teenager.
kind of seeing, right, the law of modeling, right? So my mentor is John Maxwell, and John is probably the world's foremost authority on leadership.
Legend, absolutely legendary.
Well, again, a lot of people still don't know his work. And again, he can either be retired or relevant, and John recently just put out, I think, one of his best pieces of content, his book about 6 months ago called The Leader's Greatest Return, all about multiplying leaders. But I bought into John's intellectual property about 7 years ago, but just the law of modeling, to see, I'm very, very blessed to come from a long line of people that are failing forward on projects, on businesses, on life, on faith. It's a consistent journey. But to see my father, who very blessed as well, he's going to be 91 years old, he's a combat veteran from Korea, and again, still living, right, a lifelong learner in understanding that he was back in his day when he's, obviously it's not all roses. I mean, struggling here, struggling there, but moving things forward and really understanding the chapter is about persistence and desire and having the Dale Carnegie information, how to connect, right? I mean, Dale Carnegie wrote one book for the most part, and it's still $1 billion income stream.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very blessed to have a law of modeling and understanding that these principles are time tested.
And my dad, being as stubborn as he is, would say that your dad is still alive because he kept the mantra of green and growing or ripe and rotting. There is no staying the same. So your dad, that he's still growing as
I need to plagiarize
at
that
91 age. That was like a nursery rhyme to me. It was said so often. And that came from his business coach and mentor, who also has a great relationship to me and John Wright. And we're going to have him on the podcast in the near future as well, because he just has meant so much to my family growing up. But that was his thing. You're either green and growing or ripe and rotting. And it's been said many different ways, right, about growth.
But that's probably the simplest one right there. Yeah. You get that one?
Yeah.
I'm a Marine. You got to speak slow and keep it simple.
Even though you speak very quickly. So it's good. So
got a lot to say sometimes and not much to do it.
So what were your initial thoughts when you first picked up this particular book?
It'll scramble your eggs. Right. Even back when let's say, even as you go in, and maybe it's, in the teenage years. And again, there's a copy. Our house was always about personal growth and development. And again, I understand a lot of people's, even today, a lot of people's houses are not, or their homes, etc. Again, very, very blessed that this law of modeling, this law of environment was always there for me, right? I mean, you can start planting seeds, but it's up to you to nurture those seeds and where you want to go from it. And again, very blessed to, education was a thing in our family, and, obviously growing up in Madison, Wisconsin. Again, very, very blessed, and to those who, much is given, much is required. But to even understanding some of that in the vernacular of the 30s and understanding, well, again, I still have those quotes on my mind, even now, though it's been, 40 plus years. And quite frankly, after I got to know John Maxwell and some of the other, I'm not that good a coach, I'm not that good a thinking partner. I've got 4 or 5 myself. Because again, they're pouring into me, I'm pouring into folks. And even when I've been digging into this, I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars investing in coaching and thinking partners and advisors. But the idea that you can sit for weeks on end and just study through a paragraph or a page here and take it to where you want. So initial thoughts to me always keep changing with this content because, again, as another mentor, Paul Shealy, who says, we're only as good as our current awareness. So every time you pick this up, no matter if you were 10 years old and now I'm 60, I literally this afternoon, as I was doing a little prep before, I came across something in the persistence chapter that was not highlighted. And there's a lot of stuff that's highlighted and rag-tiered in this 5-year-old copy. And it was really something that I hadn't caught. Your awareness will be up-leveled every single time you read this. And I think that, why is that? Because if we're really moving forward, if we really are growing, we've got a different view of the world. We've got a different awareness to where we are from where we might have been 2 weeks ago when we read this.
Right.
I mean, especially now.
Right.
My gosh, back in the good old days of February of 2020. Wow. You know, talk about structural change.
Before a global pandemic hit us. Yeah.
But if you really take a look, and maybe we can touch on that, but you start looking at some of these vignettes. This took 18 years to write and edit and edit and edit. And I mean, basically, it was Napoleon Hill is a young author from Chicago, basically getting downloaded, if you will, the Rolodex, the LinkedIn, the Facebook of Andrew Carnegie, the world's first billionaire.
Yeah.
Go interview all these people. Why was I a success after I got off a boat from Scotland with 2 cents in my pocket? And I can still now, after 40 years, see some of those same people and they still have 2 cents. I've done pretty well. Why?
Yeah.
Go, I will be your patron. Go do this for me and put those together. And it did take about 20 years. But if you look at it, really, when it came out, we were 4 years into the Great Depression. And what they're saying in there, to quite frankly, it looks and smells and sounds, right? It's a real tactile experience to say, where are we with the structural change in July of 2020? Were they not there in the readjustment in the 30s and the late 20s? Interesting. And the fact that they believe that there's great opportunity in front of them when they put that out in 1936 and the world is basically on its backside.
Yeah. I actually saw something on Instagram of all places that talked about, this was within the last week, if not weekend, where it talked about all the companies that have risen up in either depressions or hard times, including Disney, including Standard Oil back when you're talking about the 1800s, and many other examples that I don't remember off the top of my head. But
well, you can fast forward right to 2008, right? I always just tell people, hey, take your age minus 12. That's where you were in the last readjustment, financial or otherwise. Well, guess what? Newman and his partners started WeWork, the largest real estate owner in the country. They don't own a building. Kosnick started Airbnb, the largest hotel operator in the world. They don't own a room. They also started the greatest transportation company in the world that doesn't own a vehicle, Uber. That was all in 08, 09, and 10. And why? Because the readjustment allowed it. Whereas you're not hearing this message. And that's what I appreciate about folks like you and Chad and people that want to move things forward. Once we're stabilized, we're going to mobilize, and we are moving forward. And you're not hearing that message. You rarely will hear that message. If you're not hearing that message, then guess what? It's time to get a new group of folks.
Yep.
And particularly with all that we're working on or towards and all we're pouring into our clients, our customers, our faith base, everything else. If you're not putting this message out to the world, then guess what? The world's probably rejecting anything that you want to have success going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because there's a lot of good things happening in certain businesses right now, but the media is not going to show us that right now. They're showing us all the things that are bad. And even local media, we see a couple restaurants closing down. And it's sad because those are places that we used to like to frequent. But there's some businesses right now that are thriving underneath the radar.
100%.
They're going to just rocket ship out of this thing.
They've understand the word pivot. They've understand, right? I mean, when you start in this comfort zone, if you weren't going to a creative zone about March 15th of 2020, well, you're done anyway. But the people that said, you know what, I've stabilized families, I've stabilized some things, now let me mobilize, right? Even the restaurant industry, right? We all know a lot of great restaurateurs. And some of these people have realized, I never had the awareness to say, I missed out previously on all the money that was coming, that could possibly come through carryout, because everyone still enjoys my product.
Yeah.
Right? And again, if you look in that persistence chapter, I mean, the idea that Mike Crate is quoting there is the fact that fortunes gravitate towards those whose minds are prepared to receive them. Fortunes gravitate towards those whose minds are prepared to receive them. If you're not prepared to receive blessings and understanding of the great success you can have, if you're not prepared for that, you're not getting it. That's just the way of the world. That's the vibration that this content gives off. It's scary how consistent that is. And from a guy who's got more than enough gray hair to go from 10, 12 years old to 60 and still see that is an ongoing item. It's incredible.
So that quote you just gave, I think most people will think of fortunes as money. What first came to my mind was education. And then the quote that I always remember in that is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So in that essence, that fortune could be the lesson that you need to learn to take yourself to the next level.
Oh, 100%, right? I mean, if you get away even from the title of the book, Think and Grow, why don't you just leave that blank? Rich. Well, rich could mean anything from physical wealth to blessings to family to wellness to your health. It can mean anything. The same way fortunes, and they're all interchangeable in this content. And it really is incredible that if you are preparing yourself to take these blessings, that, again, the world's not coming to your doorstep. You're going to have to work. And that's, again, where most people, will get into some persistence and desire, but the reality is it's not coming to you without hard work. You mentioned about some of the education. I mean, one of my coaches who's actually recently exited his second company, over 100 million in revenue. Well, he dropped out of school in 10th grade. It wasn't for him. That wasn't what was beaten down his path. He quickly realized, maybe I am pretty good at cleaning toilets in restaurants in South Florida, and ultimately that was his first commercial cleaning company, and he parlayed that into, and ultimately he recently had helped John Maxwell create a $100 million revenue stream that never even existed 7-8 years ago.
Yeah, and you think about that, and his story has nothing to do with the tech sector, or my story for that matter, and you look at what we always think about is, well, Bill Gates was a dropout, Steve Jobs was a dropout, Zuckerberg was a dropout. They all were, but it doesn't mean that you go into the tech sector if you're a dropout. That's not the only area you can make millions of dollars, or if it's not about the money, have a massive impact on the world.
So 100%, right? I mean, just as the name of the podcast, impact lives. I mean, how are you going to have impact? It's not always from the fact that you can change everything with capital, right? Give somebody your greatest asset, which is your time. Again, we're all looking to make capital, go get rich first. You want to cure cancer, go get rich first. You want to cure, poverty around the world, go get rich first. Because again, you cannot give what you do not have. I mean, that's as old as the hills, but yet that consistently runs the themes into this content. And if somebody's not willing and wanting to be of that nature, of working into it and having a different level of awareness, because it is all about thinking. And ask yourself that, how many people do you know that really think? I mean, like Paul, my coach says, before you ask somebody what they think, make sure they do.
Yeah, make sure you value their opinion as well.
And quite frankly, in the persistence chapter, it's one of the greatest hammers of anything, why people are not successful. Because the fear of criticism. Well, don't allow that. If you're going to listen to everybody else, right, the Thanksgiving dinner, well, Uncle Joe down there really doesn't see you as a financial advisor you had a great corporate job. Who the heck is Uncle Joe? Okay. But again, you have to be bulletproof, so to speak, within that mindset, within that getting to the desire, getting to the persistence, and then using these principles to move things forward. Because if you're not willing to move forward, believe me, nobody else is willing to see you be successful. You're going to set a higher bar, and that's not good for the crowd.
Oh, that's great. What came to mind for me there is when a new advisor starts and they are trying to help a young professional get into savings or investing or whatever it might be, and they recommend a Roth IRA or life insurance or whatever, and a parent says, I don't think you should do that, you should do this. And I'll ask him, well, what does dad do? Well, he's a logistics manager for a trucking company. Well, what does he know about that product then, or the recommendations that you just gave their child? Probably not much. So it's just funny that came to mind as you were talking. I was like, we deal with that a lot.
God knows you're going to get your heart surgery from, you're going to ask your plumber and your tech guy and your financial advisor about your heart condition before you're probably going to have that surgery.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
But again, right, it all comes back to that if you are going, someone else's opinion of you is none of your damn business. And if you can start getting to that level of thinking, and that's what has brought me there, particularly the last 7 years, being around people that are really very, very intentional. Because it all starts with intentional. We're going to talk desire and persistence, but you know what? If you're not intentional to move forward, it's not coming to you. But if you are around people that aren't of that abundance mindset, my gosh, you need to move on. Yeah. And that is the toughest thing to do, right? We've always had to do something. You've got 168 hours this week. It's a gift. Well, guess what? If you're going to take time to do something within there, you're going to have to give something up. Not always is it give up to go up. It is something to give up. Yeah. So what are you sacrificing? What are you moving away? I contend that if you're around people that do not have that mindset that you're desiring, you're basically a product of the 5, 6, 7, 10 people that you're around. My gosh, if you were COVID downtime with people in a situation that have not been really good for you for the last 90 days, you're a mental wreck by now. Yeah. You're not going to see these things. But if you may have been very intentional about getting on some Zoom, getting on some podcasts, and thinking into things, being on some of these calls that anybody wants to host, Doesn't take anything to get on a line and take time to mastermind with somebody.
And change
and
who
there's
you
the
are.
principle number 9.
Yeah.
And change at least what your thinking is.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to make any changes financially or right down the line until your level of thinking is changed. And that's the piece that most people do not want to do the work.
I want to get to persistence next, but
Sure.
before I do, your book is studied. Like just looking at it, I can see across here, it is studied. Notes, post-it
Camera
notes,
angle?
bookmarks,
Yeah.
highlights, everything. So what I think though, what I want to touch on here is that most people read to finish a book, I think. You are reading to truly study and understand what the great lessons of this book are trying to teach you. Talk on that for a second, because I think that's a big miss by most people.
But again, if I'm Granite Michelangelo still chipping away here. I mean, again, you're a lifelong learner. My modeling comes from great parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, who basically pioneered this area. I mean, how much persistence must you have had to have when you moved here, when you came off a ship in 1840? Nothing existed. The way of the world was certainly, you were going to have to make your way. But you're right, when people are actually reading something to move, well, you know what, it's an assignment. Guess what? In the real world, you don't get paid for assignments. You get paid for completion, right? Excellence is a form of completion. And if you're not going back into this, if you're not taking something, whether it's reading, but again, we've got a lot more than the physical books, right? You can have a Kindle, you can have, scrolled notes, you can have any of that way that your model of learning says. But if you're not pouring into something, you're not going to move forward. It's physically and mentally impossible to move forward and be successful at any level. And particularly without, it's never going to be perfect, right? I mean, this book is not perfect, but then again, neither am I. And you start taking a look at these things. I've certainly, and I'll make a note, in there with a highlight or something. I'll just say, literally, I wrote right there. You know what? I found that on July 15th, 2020. And it's right next to something that this is a 5-6-year-old book. It was something right May of 2015. That came into my awareness on July 15th. And boy, oh boy, I mean, that one scrambled my eggs 20 minutes ago. It basically is the quote that says, you know what? Through every adversity is brought a seed of the next opportunity. Wow. I mean, that's exactly where we are. Everyone, if anyone's complaining about that there's no opportunities because we've now got this readjustment, I got news for you. Greatest time to grow, scale, or start anything ever in history. I've got a little muscle memory at 60. I was at 1987 when the market was down 22%. I was a 27-year-old trader on Wall Street. Probably I'm not in the right industry here, and that's been about 18 months since I got here. But you know what? All the other advisors, and you probably have some real experience with this, given your expertise here, guys. But the idea that all the people with books of business, this is not a good time. Boy, oh boy. Well, after my pity party of about 15 minutes, and then the guy that was running the office came out and basically jumped on his desk going, I don't know, but if it may be the end of the world, who knows? It's a 50-50 shot. But guess what? I don't think Pampers are going out of business. Tide's not going out of business, nor Electric. Let's just, if we want to buy something, let's buy Procter & Gamble, and let's buy General Electric. Okay. And then to take that down for the next number of years as I was building a book of customers, building a book of clients, which I didn't know anybody in the neighborhood. I was cold calling. I didn't have a silver spoon family because everybody else in that office of Lehman Brothers in Beverly Hills, California, right next to Rodeo Drive, I guess it was Rodeo, they told me. But I guess that everybody that had an office in there as a young financial advisor licensed, their family in 1988 had scholarshiped them $20 million to open the account. I didn't have that. But Mr. Goldberg said, you know what, no, you're not checking these boxes. Why am I talking? I'm from the Midwest and I know how to trade commodities. And his unaware response was, is that corn and SHIT? Yeah, that's what it is. Well, you know what? That actually may be something that you could work in here. I don't know anything about it, nor does anybody in our office. But just the idea that these adjustments and the idea that this is a time that people have to understand, opportunity, every opportunity comes from a seed of the last adversity.
So I love that. So every adversity, every failure, and every heartache carries with it the seed of an equivalent or a greater benefit.
That is absolutely it. And if you want to sit and marinate that for a while, or an hour, or weeks, or months, like I said, I've been with coaches and we've studied stuff for hours. And it's not just a book, it's a paragraph, it's a sentence. And you take it with where you are in your own situation, and you will prosper like nobody's business.
Yeah, I love Maxwell's teaching on reflection, reflective learning. right? Because most learning doesn't happen until you reflect upon it and actually take it in. And what does that mean to you, and how are you going to apply it into your world?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, I love that. But that's exactly what Think and Grow Rich is. It's the idea that every time you open these pages, you're at a different place in your life. You know what? Guess what? You're right exactly where you're supposed to be. And that's where, I think we're all really good at taking something off somebody's plate. Listen, don't beat yourself up that you haven't opened this book. Don't beat yourself up that you haven't gotten on one of my mastermind calls. Don't beat yourself up, man. I'm just a guy. But start where you are. Oh, well, thank God. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Just start today. When was the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. Okay, well, the second best time is today.
Mm-hmm.
Second best time to start on your personal growth and development is probably 20 years ago. Well, I'm only 21. Okay, well, start today. Do something, but have an action piece. Have an action piece.
Sure.
And that's where most people fail. It's the lack of the action. You can read this a million times, but if you're not going to act on it, which is exactly what he says in these chapters, and hey, maybe he was just some old guy that didn't understand stuff, but I'll tell you what, you cannot find many successful people who have not had some of this content come and touch their life at some point in time. In fact, you mentioned, one of my first mentors, just because I had met him in Florida when he'd already sold most of his business, was H. Wayne Huizinga. And Mr. Huizinga was nothing but a guy that went from garbage to videos. How did that work? I mean, the guy just did nothing but boring cash flow businesses. It didn't have to be technology. Are all the opportunities gone in the world because you didn't start Amazon with Bezos or anything else? No. Find your own opportunity. That's the whole point of this content. Make your own way.
Knowledge is power, but only when put into action, right?
Okay, plagiarize that one too.
Right, so that's good. No, so I actually heard this early on in my career, and I loved it. So you can steal this one, is that if you steal one idea from one person, it's plagiarism. If you steal 100 ideas from 100 people, it's called research.
I got that, right? From the Wall Street experts. Well, Maxwell's got the same thing. He says, listen, if I say something and you want to use it, give me credit the first 2 times. After the third, just say, hey, it's been said.
It's been said.
Okay, thank you.
And if you want to credit with me, credit it to me.
But isn't that the beauty? I mean, everything's not everything's been invented, but most of it has.
Yeah.
Most of these things. So you don't have to just rely on somebody else's and use it to your own advantage.
Yeah.
That is the point to this content. Everybody has a different level of desire. They have a different level of persistence. Every single thing in there has to be self-tailored. And when you understand that, that's when the comfort comes in going, hey man, I am struggling. Or hey, I am really successful. Well, guess what? If you're number 1 in the class, it's time to find a new class because you're not growing.
Yep, exactly. So what if you were to teach or tell anyone about persistence and the number one thing that you've learned or that they could apply today that will change their life, what would it be?
Well, we just mentioned it.
All right.
You have to take the action step. You can have the greatest DNA for persistence. And I'll tell you what, until you get knocked down 2, 3, 5, 1,000 times, you don't even know what persistence is. And that's where most people, and again, it's not age bias, but the reality, I mean, you could have been downsized from corporate now, right? My phone's ringing off the hook from people who got furloughed and said, you know what, I took that as a sign from the universe. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Even if they called me back, I'm not going back to be chief operating officer. I've always wanted to own a bakery or whatever it is. But the idea that the persistence piece has to be thrown into action. John's got a quote, and it just, it struck me so hard a couple of years ago. I put it on my business card, and it's still there. And it basically says, action is what converts the human dream into significance. Action is what converts human dreams into significance. Because there ain't anything happening without the action piece. And that's exactly where this content can come, is you must be persistent. And again, everyone's going to have a different level of persistence. And when you get knocked down, have your pity party. I'm not saying don't have your pity party. Have it for 42 seconds or 42 days, but move on.
Got to move on.
Move on, right? I mean, you guys are in the financial practice. Hey, that situation, that season of your life, that now is ended. You must move on. Same way with anything we're trying to do. If you're struggling with the idea of this structural change, well, good luck, because this is going to continue. It has for centuries. And every structural change, as we just mentioned, every adversity brings a greater seed of a greater opportunity. But until you start putting things into your system that is a different level of thinking, you won't see them. The greatest opportunities are right here, right now. And some of us are going to see them, but most of us will not, because as Maxwell says, a lot of great opportunities right now will never be seen because they are wrapped up in what looks like difficulty. Of course they are. That's exactly why Newman started WeWork. Did anybody really think that, you know what, I'm going to put something on my phone and your car is going to come pick me up? Again, Jeff Bezos, if you go back in YouTube, right, when Bezos had hair, back in the day on Wall Street when he was starting. In fact, I just read, yesterday I believe was the first day that Amazon opened up, like 20x years ago. And if you look at the YouTube videos of Bezos and how he was trying to convince the Wall Street crowd, the investment crowd, the crowd that supposedly knew it, they couldn't see his idea. I understand, Jeff, but why? It's a bookseller. It's not a bookseller. And now we're buying everything from Pampers to plumbing supplies to everything else.
Everything.
Oh my God, wasn't that in the COVID portfolio? I guess it was. I mean, it's going to be the first $3 trillion company, for God's sake. But again, he was so persistent. And the guy came from a very successful background in investments. But he had the idea, he had the persistence. And you don't tell me that that guy wasn't every single person, everywhere you look, just continually hammering and going, it won't work. That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that opinion, which isn't mine. I will stay here.
And it's great because I remember buying books from him, and now I buy everything from him.
100%. But did we also see, he just went public? Well, that can't be worth much.
Just unreal.
First company I was pitching at Lehman Brothers was something called Microsoft. Again, people didn't see the whole software thing. Not that I did, but I was just a young, stupid guy, selling stock on the street.
Ambitious.
Ambitious. I didn't have any dough, so you know what? You're going to figure this out real fast, or you're going to go work for a bank. Well, okay, but you know what? Just the research was already done. I didn't have to be that guy. I'm 27, 28, 29, and most of the people at that time that I'm prospecting and speaking with were 30 years older than. Well, so what's your story? Well, how much money you got in the market? Well, not much yet. I'm aspiring to be you. Oh, okay. But again, it was the persistence. People will see persistence. And when they see persistence, that's when you think you're hammering and nobody's noticing. That's when you're going to get that nugget, because the man upstairs doesn't mess around with that. She's going to put something in your orbit that says, thank you for noticing. And that with my tribe is our number one thing. We're always saying, thanks for noticing.
Yeah,
thanks for
that's
noticing.
Awesome. So I heard this crazy stat, Chad. I don't even know if I showed you with this, but we were talking about Bezos. So Patrick Mahomes signs this monster NFL contract worth $500 million, right? $503 million over 10 years. Great contract, well deserved. Bezos will earn the entirety of that contract every 36 hours.
I figured it might be before lunch, but
so we'll earn.
But again,
$500 million.
Didn't start out that way. That's the point, right? You back him up. I was working with a CEO of a very successful company, came up from Florida a couple of weeks ago, and he says, "Yeah, I guess I'm the overnight success after 28 years." I said, "Yeah, but nobody saw that work. They didn't see the struggles. I mean, even my own family. I mean, there's a trucking company down in Janesville, and quite frankly, the third generation owner now, the grandson." He wasn't there with the struggle when my uncles got out of Korea with Chinese shrapnel on their shoulders and started this trucking company. He's been pretty comfortable. So with his comments over the 50 years in, saying, well, maybe we should sell it. Wait, where have you been? You haven't seen any of this. You could go shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in one generation. It is the persistence factor, but that's what is. It's kind of like the military, right? Nothing is given; it is all earned, and I think the same with persistence.
Let's talk a little bit about desire. Why do people fall short on their desires?
Because they don't qualify their desires. They don't clarify their desires. If you look in there, and I think it is in, is it desire? They've got basically Napoleon Hill when we referred there. He basically puts out 6 steps. And if you think it's crazy, go through the exercise, because I've done it hundreds of times. And it is startling. It is astonishing. If you start with some clarity, you end up with some mastery. But it's just like, a coach of mine said, his nephew came to him and said, well, the market's taking off on houses, and geez, I'm just not making enough money, and boy, I'll just never own a house. And it's just lamenting, oh, woe is me, oh, woe is me. And Paul says, well, have you looked at a house? Well, no, I don't have any money. Well, have you talked to a mortgage broker? Well, no, I don't have any money. All he did for 17 different reactions was, no, I don't have any money. Well, how would you know what you wanted if you never clarified it? And physically, yes, I know the iPhone is since 2007 invention, but if you're physically writing something down, the million-year-old brain does take that into context. The idea that ultimately, you fast forward about a year, this kid ended up in a first-time home buyers program because he actually started clarifying. It's time tested. It's a million things, but you need to have some clarity. What do you want? I just asked a young guy the other day. Well, I'm going to be making $1 million. I said, well, if you made $1 million next year, how much would you have to have? Let's say just on an average. Let's just split it up. How much would you have to make a month? Well, I don't know, but I'm going to have $1 million in 2021. Okay. Well, you don't know that $83,333.33 every single month is $1 million at the end? Well, no, I didn't know that. Well, how are you going to do that if you don't have the awareness to understand? I said, I know that because back in the day, my goal was to be $1 million producer on Wall Street. I knew that I had to have average $83,333.33 every month.
Net.
Yeah.
You got to figure the gross net thing in there too, yeah.
But again, it's the idea that most people will not take the time. Guess what, folks? It is work, man. It is work, and that's the tough part about it. And again, I think in your notes, Chad, they were terrific. It says, what's that thing between success and failure? It's so small. It's such the fact that those people that find success, they just tweak something just a little left or right or center that we sometimes don't see. And I go, well, I could have. No, you couldn't have because you didn't clarify, right? I mean, in your line of way, or whatever somebody's working on. Well, who are you going after? Who are you prospecting? Well, I want my business to really grow at this restaurant. Well, who are you going after? What's your great client? What's your client avatar? Well, I don't know. It's just the shotgun approach is great, but it's not going to work. You have to be in your desire. You have to start with a desire, but then you really have to have some clarification. And then I think it rolls into you have to have a burning desire, and you have to meld all that in with an action piece.
Yeah.
And it has to be an all obsessive, compulsive obsession desire for something. And believe me, folks, it is not all about money. It never has been and never will be.
Usually it's an outside motivator that the money is attributed to. So that's really good.
100%. Like bring back why. I mean, you're familiar with probably Simon Sinek's work.
Yep.
It goes back to his first book that really put him on the map. Go back and understand your why. Getting to why, W-H-Y. Because the two greatest days of anybody's life are when they're born and when they figure out why. And that will transform everything you think about.
Love Sinek's work. The other thought that came to mind as you were talking about clarity was Stephen Covey's work in the 7 Habits, begin with the end in mind. And as you were describing that with that $1 million person, first of all, just do some math. Young man or woman,
hadn't done the math. And again, it wouldn't matter if he was young or old or downsized and he's 48. Wouldn't matter. They hadn't done the work. They'd gotten to no clarity. They supposedly had this desire, but guess what? 99.9% of people, everybody's got a desire. Oh boy, I got a picture of a very exotic car on my desk. Well, that's it. Oh, I got a picture. Great. Well, what are you doing to get there? You have no clarity.
And then I love your question because it's the most powerful question in the world. Why? And usually the first why they come up with is not the real why. So you ask, okay, well, why do you want that? And then why do you want that? And it's usually about 5 whys into it that they actually get to.
But that's the work.
Yeah.
That's where when you've got a thinking partner, when you've got a mastermind group, when you've got a sounding board, it is tough. It is tough work. And when somebody's working with you, and it can be virtually, it doesn't have to be in person. When you start breaking away those layers of the onions and those barriers to understanding, that's my why. That's it. It's because you know what? Those gorgeous kids are going to be educated, and that's the why I'm working for what I'm working for, or whatever it is. But there has to be clarity. I mean, one of my coaches says, you know what? Clarity begets mastery. You'll never have mastery of anything until you have clarity.
Yeah. Was there anything that we haven't covered in your notes yet that we want to?
Well, let's see. Burning desire, the mastermind group, intensity of the desire, the action piece we went over. We
were all over persistence. We crushed persistence.
Crush persistence as we should, and again, I think they really do meld together, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a desire, at some point you're going to have to back that up with persistence. And
I know the story.
Yeah, I think that's it.
The story Chad put down was reflect on the story of Barnes and Edison, and that was really cool. So Barnes wins his goal because he wanted to become a associate of Thomas Edison. Yep.
Which, you know what, I bring that forward into the real time. Right, that would have been bad. Obviously for a lot of listeners, who the heck was Edison and who the heck was Barnes? I mean, that's just the reality. You can Google it, but it would have been like a young man or woman having with some knowledge and with some education, saying, you know what, I am going to be the assistant to Elon Musk. I'm going to be in on this whole space. I'm going to be in on the electric. I'm going to be on everything. That was the equivalent of Edison in the time. I mean, this was absolutely the equivalent. So what the young assistant persistently wanting to go work, it's just like anybody else. You're getting 3-4 rejections from that great company that you want to work for. Well, be unique, man. Get in the front door somehow. You know, I've also got a coach with all my philanthropic interests. He says, you know what? You've got to get on their agenda before they'll ever get on your agenda.
Yeah.
Go out and do. He actually stood in a soup line before understand I can get have time with this person that has $1 billion and he's been fairly successful. But the idea that to be persistent and actually with that. So let's say the young man or woman does want to go and work with Tesla or SpaceX or anything in there or Jeff Bezos, any of these luminaries. You have to feel it, you have to touch it, you have to have an all-consuming obsession. Now the other vignette in there, it's right past that, I think even more so that most people would hear, well, where did the term burning desire come from? Literally in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, when the ashes were still smoldering in the city of Chicago, when the place had completely burnt down, there was one, the Chamber of Commerce, let's say, the business people were out there, 30 or 40 of them, and to a man, and some lesser extent a woman, to a man or woman, they'd all said, you know what, I'm not going to rebuild. It's not worth it here. It's not going to work in this place called Chicago if we could ever rebuild it. One man got up on, literally, the coals were still burning, and he got up and said, gentlemen, ladies, I will build the greatest store on this site, and I will rebuild. And that was Marshall Field, and ultimately built a great retail store. And ultimately, he was right. But again, it was a burning desire. It was an obsession. I'm not letting complete destruction take me down. I'm going to rebuild and I'm going to be bigger than ever, right? Fast forward to today. I had things maybe I was mailing it in February of 2020. Things were good. Now I've had to go from this comfort zone to this creative zone on everything I'm doing. Well, maybe everything should have been realigned. Everything should have been looked at. Because now I'm going to go, you know what? We were good doing 20, 30 million bucks in revenue. Why aren't we doing 100 million in revenue? Tweaking a few things, right? Going back to the successful people. It's just a little left or right or center from what somebody that was doing the same project over and over and over. Fracking, oil. We're the greatest oil producing nation in the world. Well, no, we're running out of oil. We're running out. They didn't have a belief in the great American entrepreneurs who took a 1935 process called fracking and just went a little left or right or center. And now we're swimming in the stuff. But it was not believed on the great American entrepreneur. Don't ever question the resiliency of this country's great entrepreneurs, business people, philanthropists, people of faith. It will happen. It will grow forward, and it will be better and bigger and better than ever. It's been doing that for 244 years. We're not perfect, but by God, we're going to get close.
And the impact of said idea, fracking. There's millionaires in central to northern Wisconsin that just produce sand.
Wait for it. Sand. It's absolutely the best sand in the world.
The finest sand to ship to North Dakota, to ship to Texas, and sell for millions of dollars to these oil companies so that they can frack the oil out of the ground.
Well, I'll align that too. Most people do not realize. I'm a commodities guy. 94% of this one commodity comes from one place in the world, and it's considered the greatest grape, ginseng, the ancient Chinese root. It's unsatiable appetite in Asia, particularly for aphrodisiac, for vitamin, for everything. It's in the diet.
Energy.
100%, the 94% of that commodity comes from one place. It doesn't come from one state. It comes from one county. That Wausau in Marathon County is around the world. But again, they got there because Mr. Su brought something from China and said, the soil here is perfect for what I'm going to plant.
The acidity in the soil. By the way, we've had our land up north tested for that because we might become sang farmers soon. So
why not?
Because why not, right? Because there's an opportunity and
there's an opportunity
and people buy
taking
it.
Advantage.
So we're running out of time here because I got to do an interview in a few minutes. However, we talked about the lightning round. Word game. So I'm going to say for our audience that hasn't heard it before, one word, and he's going to give a one word or short word or short sentence answer to the first thing that comes to mind. And the one rule is he cannot repeat himself. Ready?
Yes, sir.
Belief.
In self.
Honor.
Yourself.
Opportunity.
Always.
Challenge.
More than always.
Death.
Haven't thought about it.
Life.
Live it every day.
Love that answer to death, by the way.
Well, man, I was a Marine, and it's kind of there, and it's known, and you're in some tough spots.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if that's all you were thinking about, you're not going forward.
All right, most people.
Never break the seal.
Great people.
Keep failing forward.
My 2 favorite words, inspire or inspiring.
Is that the lightning round?
Yeah, it's lightning round. So these are the last 2 words. I'm going to give you inspire and impact. Inspire.
Inspire everyone.
Impact.
I can't repeat. Impact the next generation.
That's great. All right. So in summation, I mean, great conversation today. I think we
really
had some
appreciate
great
it.
points. Great points. I know there's going to be a lot of takeaways from people today. So curiosity, because I always end with favorite book, and obviously I think we covered that pretty well. So let's say favorite book outside of Think and Grow Rich.
Well, it actually just recently came into my awareness. I mean, I've known Simon through John and Paul for the last number of years, and kind of before he was just getting going, Simon Sinek. And his content that he's just recently put out, and again, kind of right at the COVID edge, and some people may have missed it, The Infinite Game.
Yeah, great book.
I mean, it's the reason that we're going to be around. Hey, it doesn't matter if you become a client today. I'm not going anywhere. It's just the idea. And a lot of that, he goes back and uses the tech analogies between Microsoft was always worried about what Apple was doing, and Apple's always said, I don't care. We're going to be moving forward. They can chase around anything.
I just read that book in the middle of COVID. So it was great.
It just came out, and I've been on a live chat and some private conversations with him. And again, it does go back to where his awareness is, and again, putting all that stuff together, going back to why.
Yeah, it's so good.
And Leaders Eat Last is another great, is his second five. And he came to that, again, Chad's in the military, I was military as well, but he came to that idea, Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek did, because he was embedded with the U.S. Marines for 6 months, and he understood that the leaders are literally and figuratively eating after all of their men and women.
Yeah. And we at Northwestern Mutual has had Simon speak a handful of times, and every time, awesome engagement. Gets rated 5 stars.
Very authentic.
Yeah.
I mean, the man is always coming up with something. And again, he's been coached by John, and Paul's done a lot with him too.
That's great. And all right, so favorite quote.
I stuck something in my pocket, literally, back in the late 70s when I left for the Marines. And I think it's apropos today as it ever was on August 22nd, 1978, when I left Madison. And thought I was going to the Naval Academy, but took a little bit different route and ended up in the Marine Corps Aviation and Fighter Squadron. But it said, on the plains of hesitation, bleach the bones of countless millions who sat down to wait, and waiting died. On the plains of hesitation, bleach the bones of countless millions who sat down to wait, and waiting died. I.e., if you're waiting around, good luck. It ain't coming to you.
That was powerful. How can our audience get in touch with you?
I've got a real robust LinkedIn network that I think everyone can really move forward with. I have a little over 16,000 contacts on LinkedIn. While I don't know every single one of them, I've just been very, very intentional with LinkedIn. So again, Kyle Arneson on LinkedIn, and my smiling mug is up there, and I put a picture of my mentor, John Maxwell, and I up there. But I think that's also, it's the greatest thing since white sliced bread to understand. I built a multi-million-dollar business or two by cold calling. And now you can have a meeting before a meeting called LinkedIn. Wow, I didn't know you went here. I didn't know you knew these people. Very, very powerful stuff. And certainly Reid Hoffman deserves to be a billionaire because he came up with a better mousetrap. So on LinkedIn, Kyle Arneson, and I've also got email and everything else.
Also came out LinkedIn on the dot-com bubble, right after the dot-com bubble in 2002.
Sure. In fact, the PayPal mafia, you will, was Reid Hoffman, Elon Musk, and a number of other folks, and they'd started PayPal, which obviously most people know that, and was looking for the next project. And Reid's was the LinkedIn, and Elon Musk. Well, that's now understood.
It's understood, especially when he gained $6 billion in one day.
Which he contends is not.
I think that was yesterday. So
yeah, that was yesterday.
Awesome.
We'll see.
Great conversation, Kyle. I really enjoyed the time.
Really enjoyed it. I appreciate your awareness, and I appreciate you thinking into it and all the things that you and Chad do for the community. Much appreciated. Thanks so much.
This is a great start back to being on the podcast, would you say?
Yeah, live and in person.
Live and in person. Just
really terrific, Jen.
It's great. So everybody have a great week. Inspire and impact. We'll talk to you soon.